Welcome to Living Your Greatness. Each episode, we bring on great people to inspire you to achieve your greatness. We discuss topics all related to health and wellness. Listen to world-class stories, learn valuable lessons, and turn knowledge into action. It is now time for you to unlock your inner greatness. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Living Your Greatness. This is your host, Ben Mummy, and today we actually have a new guest to the show, and his name is Nathaniel Miller. So for those of you who don't know Nathaniel, he is a former professional water polo player. He played water polo for 18 years, and 14 of those years was with Team Canada. In that time, he won bronze medals at the Pan Am Games and placed first at the Commonwealth Games in 2002. He is also a native of Kirkland, Quebec, and placed 11th at the Beijing 2008 Summer Olympic Games. So Nathaniel, welcome to the show. It is a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thanks, Ben. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Yes, same here, Nat. So just to kind of kick off this interview, if you could just tell us a little bit more about yourself. Where did you spend your formative years growing up in Canada? And what inspired you to become a world-class water polo player?
Where to start? I mean, ultimately grew up in the West Island of Montreal. And, I think, as you know full well, the West Island's got a very unique aquatics ecosystem. All those summer pools that were, a really great testament to long-term funding in sport facilities, right? So I think most of the pools in the West Island came from the 1968 Commonwealth funding. And then left a legacy of outdoor summer pools that we got to grow up in. And so, like a lot of kids in the West Island, I grew up close to a summer pool. We signed up and then basically spent every day, every waking hour during our summers at the pool between swimming lessons and diving team and swim team and eventually water polo. And so that's where I grew up and got into the love of being outside and love of being in the water. Water polo, and you might remember this or might not, but when I was growing up, it wasn't really for younger kids. You had to be 12 to start playing, and so as a young boy, the older kids all played, and you kind of looked up to the older guys who played water polo. And so, at my 12-year-old summer, I sort of made the jump and started playing water polo. I was not a performance-minded athlete by any stretch of the imagination when I was a kid. As my mom likes to joke, because I'm now coaching my daughter's soccer team. And when I started playing soccer, I was one of the dandelion pickers. I would go out on the pitch and sit on the grass and pick the dandelions and not really care too much about the ball. But I mean, when it came to water polo, it was kind of the same thing. I was there for my friends. I was there for the games. I loved to play. Did not like training, and was not really a hard work motivated, driven athlete. And so for me, that journey towards athletic excellence unfolded sort of much later on.
Awesome, Nat. Thanks for sharing about your story. And, I was also able to connect with a lot of that because similar to you, right? I'm from the West Island. And for anyone that is listening, that's from the West Island of Montreal, it truly is an amazing aquatic pool system that we have. And so it was cool to hear about how, that was how you were introduced, in terms of early exposure. I actually started probably at a younger age because I think my generation, there's more advocating for, 10 and under tournaments and stuff like that. So I actually started maybe when I was 8, but kind of like you said, because you started maybe more at 12, most of the time before my generation, it was just kind of 14 under and 16 under tournaments. So thanks for kind of sharing about that background of how you got introduced. So Nat, transition forward from there, did you have any coaches who helped maybe inspire you along the way to become a national athlete? Because you kind of said at the beginning, it was just more for fun. So how did that transition then into you taking it more serious and going from a rec level to more competitive edge level?
Yeah, well, I mean, great question. One, I would say, absolutely along my journey, I've had a ton of fantastic mentors and coaches. But, for me, the truth is, my journey towards more, serious competitive water polo was all about swag. It was about gear. And so I'll tell you a little story to kind of unpack that. Basically, I started playing when I was 12. That was the first year that they had a 12-year-old program in the winter season. So Dollar Water Polo launched that when I was 12 years old. So kind of good timing or good luck. And 2 of my summer teammates decided to sign up for winter water polo. And I decided to join with them, just like I said, to hang out with my friends. So we played our first year, and I was the kind of athlete that often would sit out whenever we were doing work sets or swim sets. I would complain about my shoulder being sore, or my knee being sore, making whatever excuse I could to not do the hard work, and then get back in when they threw the balls in and we could play. And and that was fine for me. I didn't really care too much. My coaches, I'm sure, weren't too thrilled. And then in my second season, it was kind of the same story. And at the end of my second season, I didn't know about this, but it turned out that the team decided to go on a trip, a road trip going down the east coast of the US. So they went down to Annapolis, they went down, I think, all the way to Florida. And I only found out about it when my two summer teammates came back, and they showed up at the pool one day, and they had all this crazy swag from these like teams down in the US. I'm like, where'd you get all that? I'm like, oh, we were on a 2-week trip with the older team. We got invited to play. And I was like, what do you mean? How come I didn't hear about this? Like, oh, I don't know. And so it turned out that the coaches had just offered 2 or 3 of the younger players to join the older team on that, and they hadn't made the offer to me. Now, at the time, I took that quite personally. I thought it was because the coaches didn't like me and were sort of being biased towards me. The reality is, why would they invite a player who didn't work hard, who wasn't committed to the sport? And my two friends had been a lot more committed. But nevertheless, at that age, I was like pissed off, and I decided I was going to quit. So I decided in my head, I told my mom, I don't want to play next year. The coaches don't like me. I'm not going to play. And at the end of our summer season, we ended up winning the, I think it was the 14U tournament. And we had a big celebration and a sleepover that night. And during the evening, my two friends, the twin brothers, the Lima brothers, John and Jeff, they were talking about the upcoming season, and super excited because it was going to be the first ever year of a 15 under national championship in Canada. And they were talking about how excited it was going to be. And, Nat, we're going to go play and it'll be great. And we'll go to nationals and all this. And at that point, I broke it to them. I broke them the news that, yeah, I'm actually not playing next year. Like, what do you mean? How come you're not playing? I said, well, the coaches don't like me. They didn't invite me on this trip. Why am I going to waste my time? They probably won't even take me on the nationals team. And that's that. And they kept, come on, now you got to play. We had so much fun. We have fun together. We got to play. You got to play. I'm like, nope, not doing it. Already made up my mind. And then John sort of chimed in. Yeah, but Nat, this year we get the jackets. We get the jackets with our names on them. I was like, ooh, jackets. And I mean, I kid you not, the biggest motivator was like, I want the jacket. I want the jacket with my name on it and my number on it. And that was the reason I kept playing. And so I signed up that year and I kept playing, and kind of more the same in terms of not really working that hard. It was a more serious season, more training, and a new set of coaches who kind of held you a bit more accountable. And I couldn't sit out, but let's say I wasn't always the hardest working kid in practices. And at the end of the year, we went to the national championships actually here in Calgary in 1995. And we played at nationals. And at the time, our team was really good. And it was really good because we had 3 guys who were pretty much the best players in the country, Matt Boucher, Kevin Carroll, and Stéphane Bergeron. And on the coattails of those guys who really were like the top players in the tournament, we ended up making the final and we won the gold medal. And, throughout the tournament, I was probably the 6th or 7th player, 8th player, something around there. And so I played a fair amount. But when we got to the gold medal game, I didn't play. I did not play until the last sort of 20 or 30 seconds when it was sure that we were going to win. Coaches called the timeout. And then myself and a few of the other kids that hadn't played yet, we could pull the splinters out of our butts and jump in just so that we could, get a chance to be in the water. And so, after that tournament, we came home. My mom was thrilled. Our picture was in the paper. We had the banner. We had the trophy, national champions. It was a big deal. Families all excited. And I was excited too. I mean, I was happy I was part of the team. We won. But inside, I felt poor. I felt like crap. I felt like I didn't deserve any of that. Everybody's talking about how great it was and you've achieved so much, but I knew that I hadn't really tried hard all year. I knew that we had won, but we had won largely because of the efforts and the intensity and the focus of some other teammates, and then I hadn't really contributed to that. And so it was that sort of moment where I decided, if I'm going to keep doing this and I'm going to keep playing and we're going to go to nationals, I want to earn whatever results that we get. I want to contribute to the team and really earn it. And so that next year, I started training a lot harder. I started, trying to keep up with some of the stronger guys in the pool. And at the end of the year, we went to nationals again, this time in Regina. We were the favorites, but we ended up losing in the gold medal game. So it was a big disappointment. But we still were, second best in the country. Came home with a silver medal. Mom was just as proud, just as happy. And to some degree, I was disappointed, like the rest of my teammates, in the sense that we hadn't achieved our goal and we hadn't won. But internally, I actually felt way better. And I mean, to this day, that silver medal I still have, and that medal means way more to me than the gold medal I'd won the year previously, because I had earned that silver medal. I played a lot, I contributed a lot, and more importantly, I'd worked hard all year. And that lesson sort of planted in me the hunger to see what you can achieve when you put effort into it. And then from there on, I started, paying attention and practice more. And it's surprise, the more effort you put in, the harder you work. All of a sudden, there's more mentors that show up and more people and more coaches that are willing to invest time and energy because of the hard work that you put in. And so from there, I mean, my story kind of goes on many different layers, but that was the catalyst that really drove me towards, I think, the process of pursuing excellence. And that really, throughout my career, you mentioned some of the accolades and the great successes I achieved, and, certainly proud of those, but really it was that journey, that process for myself, but also with other people, with other guys who were willing to put in the sacrifice, were willing to put in the effort. And even when we didn't have great results, afterwards you look back on it, and that experience, that journey was totally worth it.
Awesome, Nat. Yeah, no, you definitely brought up a lot of great points of, it wasn't one coach, right? It was many mentors, but then beyond that, there was other little, how do I say, experiences that really contributed to even before even meeting those coaches, right? So kind of like you said, right? The swag, so like the jacket, right? So that reward, right? Because you're kind of younger then, right? And then as well as being on a team with other people, right? So togetherness, right? Your buddies and playing with them and wanting to feel part of something, right? But then the biggest thing I think you touched on was the fact that, our biggest failure could be our biggest lesson to then make us want to actually work harder for something, right? So you not being happy with, realizing, okay, I didn't earn this, right? I didn't work hard enough. I didn't really actually truly feel part of this, even though I was part of the team, right? So there were so many elements that go into that process that you were kind of explaining about. And so I was really happy to kind of hear about that story and also share with other people listening, because sometimes people think that everyone just gets from A to B right away, but really it's not like that in anything in sports and life. There's a whole journey, right? So thanks for kind of sharing that. And something that I want to go to next, Nat, is I know you are known as one of Canada's most decorated water polo players. I know you spoke about before, like earning your progress and all that stuff, to becoming a better player. But how do you think you earn this reputation?
Well, I'm humbled by that, and certainly, I've heard, I'd say overly generous praise at times about my career and the experiences along the way. I mean, when you're in the thick of it, like, you're doing this thing because you love it, and you hope that other people see the effort and the what you bring into it. But for me, like, when I do hear from people, in particular when I hear from some parents or some younger people who maybe got inspired to pursue the sport more seriously because of what they saw me do, I mean, that really feels great. I mean, at its core, it is a journey that's about getting out what you put into it, and for me along the way, I mean, what I put into it was everything I could, and as a result, I was able to achieve some things that I could never have achieved if not for standing on the shoulders of others. And I think of a guy like Mike Sabo. He was a national team athlete for a long time. I remember going to a provincial camp when I was 15 years old, and he was there. He was from Laval. He was at a pool in Laval, and he had a Superman tattoo, right? And this guy was like, he was so fit, so fierce, so intense, and he kind of scrimmaged with us, and I mean, kicked the crap out of us, right? But I was so in awe of him. And then I got to watch him a few weeks later at the national championships, and he played on this Laval team that wasn't particularly strong, but he pretty much willed them to a bronze medal. And I still remember watching that tournament at Camo there up in the stands, and he played center. But during that game, he played center and he checked the hole, and he was back and forth. And I know many of your viewers probably won't be too familiar with water polo, but typically a hole player doesn't check the hole, and vice versa. Hole checkers don't check because it's such a demanding position physically, really the most demanding position in the pool, or two positions. And watching him do that back and forth, I can remember sitting in the stands with Mike Gordon and a few other teammates, and we were just in awe, like, he was doing so much. And at the time, I was inspired by that, and I had the opportunity when I moved to Calgary to train with them, and he was an incredible mentor and leader, and just his work ethic every day. But as it turned out, as my career progressed and our national team progressed, in 2005, I was a hole checker and had really, gotten to a pretty high level as a hole checker. And that was my strong position, if you will. And then our hole center at that time ended up quitting unexpectedly. And we didn't really have a backup. The backup was a younger guy. He was only 17 or 18. And so heading into those world championships in Montreal, the coach came to me and said, you know what, you're going to have to play the hole. I said, what are you talking about? I'm not a hole player. And so I started playing the hole. And then a few years later in my professional career, I ended up, basically playing hole and check. And it was something that even I played for some top clubs in Europe, and people couldn't believe that someone could do that. And I mean, I believed I could do it because I watched Mike Sabo do it, and it ended up being an incredible asset for my career professionally. And I think it hopefully laid some inspiration for some younger players. So I really think it is that process of you stand on the shoulders of others who come before you and who kind of lay the road of what it looks like to be an athlete, to be a leader, and you try your best to emulate those things and hopefully plant those seeds for future generations.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think you could definitely learn a lot from other great players, right? And that actually kind of leads me to my next question is, we've already talked a little bit about you starting, with Dollard, in terms of club, and then going more to, being on the national team. But as you just mentioned, you also reach an international level, right? Where you played in Europe. And I know you played water polo in Barcelona, France, Brazil, Montenegro, all these beautiful countries. And when you competed there, I know you played against some of the best water polo players in the world, especially because Europe is, known for water polo. So what do you believe separates a good water polo player from a great water polo player?
Stubbornness. I mean, at its core, and you know what, I'll take that actually out of the context specifically of water polo, because really I think it's the same in any pursuit and any profession really. But when you think about sports in general, I had the great opportunity of working at the Olympic Committee for a few years and supporting, and I got to know the winter athletes quite a bit because I supported athletes at the village in Sochi at the Winter Olympic Games. And what I would say, I'll share a small story. There were some athletes, and I won't name them, but we had at the Olympic Village, we had we have an athlete lounge and some areas for the athletes, and that's to make it as comfortable as possible during the games. And we had opening hours, right? So they were open from, the lounge was open from 8 a.m. till I think 6 or 7 p.m. But we also told athletes as they came into the village that if they needed to get up earlier because of their training schedules, or, if they had some meditation practices or stuff they wanted to do, to just let us know, and we would open the room up earlier. And we offered that to everyone. And certainly, a bunch of athletes talked to us about that. But there were 3 in particular that right from the first day, they came to us right after and said, you know what, because of our training times and our training schedule, we're going to need to be up at 5:30 every morning. So we're wondering if you could open the room at 6 so we can do our meditation, visualization, all that. And I said, sure, no problem, absolutely. And so we opened the room, and sure enough, they were there every morning religiously doing that pre-work, that prep work to get ready for their training sessions. Now, these 3 athletes, 2 of them ended up medaling, one of them a gold medal, one of them a bronze medal. They were, at the time, I think they were 17, 19, and 22. So, kids, really, right? They're just very, very young, but so mature, so responsible. And, when you watch the results and the performance, it's easy to see them and say, wow, they're so talented, they're so skilled, and, that it's something special about them at the physical level or the technical level that allows them to achieve that greatness. Well, no, it's just as simple as they're willing to put in the extra work that not everybody else is willing to put in. And yes, you do have occasionally some people who are, genetic freaks or have some privileges or gifts that put them up into that upper echelon. But the reality, and I heard one great strength trainer talk about this, for most sports, there's a sort of 70% bar of physical capacity, physical and technical capacity. Everybody has to be at that bar. But then after that bar, the difference from that bar to the top is negligible. The difference between the best athlete in the world and the 500th athlete in the world in any discipline is, you're talking about minutia. What really separates people once they've hit that threshold is their mindset, is their emotional capacity, is their ability to work well with their teammates, their coaches, their medical staff. It's all those soft skills, if you will. And those soft skills only come if you put in the work. And that's putting in the work daily that you're doing on yourself, but also the work of building your relational capacity with other people, whether it's teammates or coaches or whatnot. And not everybody's willing to do that work. And when you see at the highest level, when you see great athletes who fall short or who never make the most of their talents, nine times out of 10 is because they weren't willing to put in that extra work on the soft skills that would really allow them to make the most out of their opportunity.
Absolutely. And I definitely would also want to add to that. I think that goes with like the whole long-term athlete development. Like usually the players that stay in the game or play for life are usually the ones that, kind of like you said, it was not just, some of their natural talents, because really it takes way more than that to become a great athlete, and also to stay in love with like the sport, right? Because it is work, and it is, it does take more progress, right? Because there's so many elements to being an athlete in any sport. And that actually makes me think about, I published an article and it was called How to Become an Expert. And it was all about like the mindset about like anything, like as like an artist or as, a teacher, as a coach or as an athlete, or it talked about like any domain. And the aspects that I came up with was deliberate practice. So not just putting in the time, like the 10,000 hour rule, but how you're training and learning, right? And then another aspect was mastering coaching, right? So having good teachers, having good maybe family, having a good community, circle of friends, and as well as coaches, right? Like all these people that have an impact on you. And then another aspect that I had was early exposure, which doesn't always apply to every athlete, right? Like Eric Lindros is an example where he started hockey when I think he was 15 or something. But early exposure, starting at a young age, is another way of obviously hitting that high level, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's like this space that I'm fascinated with. I'll be frank. I mean, I started coaching in the West Island when I was 15 years old, and without a doubt, the coaching that I did at an early age contributed to my athletic development, because I started to understand better what the successful kids that I was coaching, how they were behaving, the parents of the kids who had the most success, who were the most coachable, and all those attributes kind of fed into my own learning journey to become a better athlete, become more curious about how to improve in that process of learning. But you touched on a few things, and it's funny that you mentioned the 10,000 hours, and then you separated that from deliberate practice. A little tidbit here, and it's a sticking point, but that book and that whole idea of 10,000 hours. Malcolm Gladwell, great writer, no doubt, obviously. But the truth of the matter is that it created a very big false pretense, and the research that he actually pulled on to build that story out was written by a Swedish man, last name Ericsson. I can't remember his first name, but he wrote a book later on that was nowhere near as fun of a read as Gladwell's book, but actually pointing out that what Gladwell sort of framed around the 10,000 hours was not at all what his research showed. And more specifically, it's that in fact it's not about a threshold of number of hours that a person needs to put in, but it really is about the deliberate practice time. And in fact, if you have very deliberate practice time, you need a lot less time than some sort of generic number or threshold. The other piece that was fascinating that again ties into your third point about early exposure. True, but it depends. So the example in this guy's research was around pitch. So for musicians, having perfect pitch has to do with, and I'm not a neuroscientist, but basically has to do with your ear's ability to pick up that range of pitch. And it turns out that you have to get a child exposed to music training, essentially, or varieties of pitch before a certain age, because if not, the brain starts to prune away some of those pathways. And once they've been pruned away, you can't develop them later on in life. So for something like that, if you don't get the early exposure, then your brain actually changes in a way that will limit how much you can develop it later on. And that is true for something like that. And I'm sure there are some sports where that might apply, but those are few and far between. Those are the exception. Instead, I would argue very strongly, and I rip my hairs at a time when I hear parents of 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds and even of 14-year-olds so focused on like, what do I need to do to make sure my kid can be a great water polo player or a golfer or a tennis player? And I have to shake my head, because the truth is, like, it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter what you do now. It quite literally doesn't, because ultimately, whether they're going to get to that level or not, whether they can get to that 70% bar is one thing. And yeah, early exposure can help you get there. But from there, how are they going to progress and how elite can they become? It's all going to be eternally driven. And we know there's tons of research that points to that. Once you get to 17 or 18 or 19 in any elite domain, it sucks. Like, make no mistake about it, being an elite water polo was a journey of constantly being in pain, constantly having shoulder issues, back issues, neck issues, traveling around. And, we're not NHLers, but traveling around in buses and packed as sardines wherever we're going. Like, just so many things that are not particularly fun. The only reason you do it at that point is because, one, you're invested in that journey, but that investment comes because of years and years of having fun. So if you're not having fun when you're 10 or 11 or 12, by the time you get to 16, 18, 20, there's no way you're going to have anything left in the tank to keep going when it really gets hard and it really sucks. And you have to kind of dig deep to those memories of why you love the sport. If your parents have been driving you, or your coaches have been driving you and pushing you to perform, to get that early exposure at a competitive level, then the odds are that by the time you're in your 20s, you're not going to want to keep sacrificing and keep putting in that work, especially because you miss out on so much. I mean, when I was in my athletic career, I would never trade it for the world. I loved it. Don't get me wrong. But the reality is my 20s was a very different experience than a lot of my close friends. I wasn't going to all the weddings and all the vacations and missing out on parties, missing out on momentous occasions with you. Talk about that circle, because you're going to the Olympic trials, you're going to the World Championships, you're recovering, and you don't have that flexibility that a lot of other people in different pursuits get to enjoy in their 20s. So you give up a lot of those experiences, and you're not going to do that unless you're very internally motivated. And I would argue that internal motivation doesn't get set because at 12 years old, you're in that elite camp. That's not what drives it. I mean, by all means, if a kid is pushing it and they want to be there and they want to be at that next thing, great. But if you're the parent who's like, well, where should I put my kid in next? You're missing the point. And far better for your kid, and we've heard this over and over again from a lot of elite coaches, far better for your kid to try a whole bunch of different activities, and develop as a well-rounded person and a well-rounded athlete. And then when they're motivated at 16 or 17 and they want to start investing the real suck kind of work, the embracing the suck, which is a term coined by a guy named Andrew Huberman, who I quite love. He's a neuroscientist out of Stanford who has a great podcast tying the neuroscience to a whole bunch of different brain development pieces. But the reality is that intrinsic motivation is all about how much suck are you willing to embrace and endure, not about the big goal and I want to be at the Olympics and all that. It's not about that. It's about, can I deal with the grind of the day to day? And again, you won't do that if in your kid years you're already forced to be going through that kind of suck.
Absolutely. And thanks, Nat, for adding those points there. Because again, like your kind of wisdom and your knowledge, but most importantly, like your passion. I really enjoyed hearing those additional details, and it made me kind of consider some things there. So I appreciate that. And it actually made me reflect as well too. I had emailed you back when I was in grade 9. So I was like 15 years old. And I remember that you said in that email, you said between a good to a great athlete, just to add to our conversation here, was you had said that, in terms of all the physical skills, athletes could get that. They could get to that level. They could learn them. But the biggest one is really the mental aspect. So having like the mental tools where, kind of like you just said, you shared all these examples of when things get extremely tough, that if you're going to be able to cope and kind of manage mentally, you need to be in it for the right reasons intrinsically, right? So you have to actually have a strong why, which is why you were playing that sport as an athlete, right? And I think you mentioned a really good point there about children or even teens getting exposed to as many activities to see what they like and see what fits them best, because you want them to have those, again, positive experiences, to have the passion and kind of love to know why they're doing it, right? Have that strong why. So something that I want to lead to next, Nat, is we just talked about, going from good to great as an athlete, but I think what really stands out to me when I see any team is a really great leader. So what qualities do you think make a great team captain?
Yeah, I mean, a great question. I think there's obviously a lot of different approaches to leadership, and it's an area that we keep adding different names or qualifiers to. So you think about servant leadership or transformative leadership, or I mean, at its core, if I look at, great leaders, I mean, one, it's the lead by example, because no matter who you are and no matter what you're doing, if you're trying to get people or support people towards a certain direction or set of behaviors, if you're not living those behaviors yourself, then you can't be a leader. Like, you might have a title, you might have a position, but I think that the really great leaders, they in a sort of methodical or disciplined way live the values and live the norms that they want to see their teammates or their group following. So I mean, that to me is a non-negotiable. If you're not willing to walk the talk, then you can't lead anyone. After that, I mean, I mentioned servant leadership, but I think if you had asked me a decade ago, I might have had a slightly different lens on it. But the more I advance in my career, and now that the work that I do currently, you start to understand that humans will respond to a lot of different stimulus, and they'll respond to different environments. You can use the carrot, you can use the stick. Like, there are a lot of different ways. We're quite adaptable. That's what we are as a species. So it's not just about what type of leadership can help a group achieve a specific goal or outcome. It's also about what type of leadership creates or contributes to the kind of experience, the day-to-day, the process that we want to be a part of. And so, and there's one, I guess, an example of this that I'll share. I worked with a bunch of different great sports psychologists over my career. I was really fortunate in that regards. And one of them, a guy named Derek Robinson, who was a long time with the speed skating group and a few of the other winter athlete groups. But we were watching, I think it was the 2004 Olympic Games. No, not think I know. The 2004 Olympic Games. We're watching the volleyball women's final and the game between Cuba and Russia. And the final was incredible. I mean, both sides were so skilled, so talented, back and forth, back and forth. I don't remember who won the game, and I intentionally don't ever go look it up to remember, because when you watch the game, as we were watching it together, the two teams, you couldn't tell a difference between them while they were playing. And I don't know how familiar you are with volleyball, but after each point, the team will sort of on the court come together and high five, and it's very upbeat. And then there are timeouts that the coach will call on. So at the timeouts, the players will then go to the bench, and that's the only time where you saw a difference between the two groups. So the Brazilians, after every point, they're upbeat, they're bouncing. Russians, same thing. But then whenever there was a timeout and they went back to their coaches, the Brazilians kept that same energy and went to the bench, and they're all kind of hugging, and coaches talking to them, and they're super engaged. And you can just see this sort of positive energy. The Russians, every time there was a timeout, they would go to the side, and as soon as the whistle would happen, they would immediately literally put their heads down, shoulders sunken in, walk in. The coach would just be screaming at them, and then they would turn around and they go back on the court. And I love that because, again, from the performance point of view, both styles were working. Both teams were achieving. If the only metric we're looking at is the ability to perform volleyball at a very high level, then you could make the case that, well, the stick approach that the Russian coach was using and the carrot approach that the Brazilian coach was using both work. And that's true. Like, you can train a human being using both. The difference is, well, if you look at those two group of people, of human beings, what does that say about how their life experience of that moment, of that game is? And what does that do to them as people afterwards? Right. And that, to me, and I know you asked more about the team captain, but I think, leadership, whether we call it the captain or the coach or anyone in the team manager, leadership is not really about a specific role. It's about your culture and the way people show up in that culture. And I think from that point of view, I had some success in a much more disciplined and authoritarian style of leadership. I personally was able to thrive in that kind of leadership. But when I reflect back on my career, and for myself as a coach and as a leader, I try to show up far more in that other vein where it's like, yes, we're trying to achieve an outcome together. And yes, we want to have excellence, and excellence is what we're committed to together. But we're also committed to this experience and the relationships we develop in this experience, because whether or not we achieve excellence and whether or not we achieve a performance outcome, we only have this one beautiful life to be on, and we want as many of those moments in that life journey that we're sharing together to be positive and reinforcing. And if we can achieve excellence in both ways, then why the hell would we not always definitively land on that side of the equation? And so, when I think about the best leaders, yeah, they got to lead by example, but they have to take a servitude lens to it of how am I supporting everyone else, both towards the objectives, but also to having the kind of experience that they want to have.
Thanks a lot, Nat, for sharing that kind of story. I was able to really picture it. And I think you made a great point there with, a good leader has to walk the talk, right? Something that I want to go to next, Nat, is I know as an athlete, especially when you were playing for Team Canada for water polo, you had an incredible ability to lead the team, and I heard that from many athletes, whether it was Justin Boyd, who was a water polo player on the team, whether it was Devin Diggle, who was on the team, or Andrew Robinson. And these guys were younger than you as well as my brother, Scott, right? And they all said that, there was something special about you. So my question that I want to ask was, how do you think your teammates described you on like the team?
Well, again, I'm really humbled to hear that. I think I mentioned Mike Sabo. I mean, Ken Hardesty was another one. Daryl Bourne. I mean, there were some really great leaders that I was able to learn from when I was competing, and I strove to try to emulate those behaviors. And when it came to younger players, coming into the training center and being around them, I really, I hope that the experience they had is that I was supportive, that I helped push them and drive them and set an example that they as well tried emulating. You mentioned a few of those names there, but I know some of those guys had the same impact on younger guys that came up after them. And so if I could play a role in doing that and continuing that, that makes me happy. But yeah, I think as a player, I was pretty hard nosed for sure. I was very stubborn and didn't mind getting into the dirty areas and and mixing it up. And water polo, as you know, is it's constantly rated as the toughest of the Olympic sports. And I believe that. And of course, I'm biased, but I've seen a lot of sports inside out. And the things that you get asked to do as a water polo player to have success, like everything happens under the water, and under the water, it's a law of the jungle. And so toughness is that 70% bar. You can't play water polo unless you're mentally tough enough to deal with someone doing nasty things to you under the water and kicking you and elbow you and all sorts of other things. And you have to play through it. And I remember our Olympic qualification game against Romania in Romania, which that's like one of my favorite sports stories of all time. But in that game, I remember at one point, I got this Romanian hole checker on my back and he's biting my neck and he's like full on vampire mode, biting my neck, and he's got his teeth in my neck, and I'm looking at the referee, and the referee makes eye contact with me so he can see this guy is biting my neck, which obviously should have been an exclusion, kicked out of the game, like obviously. And the referee just looked at it and nothing, right? And that game, we ended up getting screwed royally by the referees. And the kickouts were 21-7 by the time the game ended. And we had to fight through that, and we managed to win with Justin Boyd scoring what proved to be the game-winning goal, a young guy showing incredible courage stepping into that game. Devin Diggle was another young guy that stepped up in that game. But I mean, that to me sort of crystallizes how I tried to show up, right? And that was, we're here to do something. We're here, whether it's in training or in games. And if we're committed to it, then we can't make excuses. And if it's not fair or people, mistreat us or whatnot, we're going to play through that. And that's how I tried to play the game, how I tried to approach it. And I think some of my teammates, saw that, and hopefully it gave them that confidence to perform the same way.
That's awesome. Now, yeah, thanks for sharing that story as well, because I know it was very memorable, as well as some thoughts on how you think people perceived you. And it was funny, actually, before today's call with you, I was actually in touch with my brother, Scott, and some other words that he used to describe you was competitive, politely arrogant, passionate, engaged, personal with others, demanding, outspoken, respectful, disciplined, and a big picture thinking person. So those were some other words that I want to let you know what he thought about you as a person, as a leader, and as a teammate. So I want to pass this on to you. I feel that you deserve to hear it. And something that I want to just kind of tap into is, you were just speaking about this qualification game, right, against Romania. And, it was a highlight of your career because by Team Canada winning this game, you guys have qualified for the 2008 Beijing Summer Games. Something that I want to ask you is, can you talk about this memorable moment and what did it feel like to go to the Olympic Games?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I mentioned it's one of my favorite, and when I say that, I say that in that positively arrogant space, but because obviously I participated in the game, but I love sport, right? And I love sport. I love history. I love storytelling, And the story of that qualification is remarkable. I mean, to set the stage for your audience, the reality for water polo in Canada, like, it is a smaller sport, a niche sport. And when it comes to the men's side, our women's side has been, a world leading program for a long time. But on the men's side, we've struggled. And the reality is we had actually never qualified directly for the Olympic Games prior to 2008. We competed in 72 based on an invitation. In 76, we were the host country. And then in 84 with the boycott, we managed to get in. And those, just so I'm clear, so many of the guys that competed in that era set the stage for future generations. Some of them were coaches, David Hart, Bill Meyer, Gaetan Turcotte, who passed away, unfortunately, this past year. But there were just so many great water polo legends that were part of that. I mean, I no means trying to diminish their incredible Olympic achievements as well. But the reality is, Canada had never qualified through the front door, as we say, for an Olympic Games. And so we were, an underdog for sure. And then going into that year, that Olympic cycle, basically the two ways of qualifying, the Pan American Games or the Olympic qualifiers, if you don't qualify through Pan Ams, we had felt that we were ready to take on the Americans, who traditionally win that qualifying spot at Pan Ams at the 2007 Games in Brazil. And we were so focused on that. We had gotten close to them. We had some close games to them, and we were highly focused on that. We had left Brazil in our dust, we thought, or so we thought. We had beaten them, I think, 6 or 7 times in a row, the most recent time by 5 or 6 goals. And then sure enough, our egos got a little bit too big. Our focus got too much on the final, that in the semifinal, we played Brazil in Brazil. And I mean, Brazilian people are incredibly proud. The stadium was rocking, probably the loudest water polo game I ever played in. And we lost. We lost in the semifinal. And more crushingly is that shortly after that loss, we found out through our head coach that Water Polo Canada, in their infinite wisdom, had decided that, well, we had no chance of qualifying anymore, so they weren't going to fund our journey to the Olympic trials 7 or 8 months later. The coach at the time, though, was adamant that we were going to find private funding. We were to figure out a way to go. And fortunately, we were able to do that. But then, so that was one setback, right? Our national federation wasn't even behind us, was basically saying, you have no chance of qualifying, so we're not going to invest in you. So right away, we knew that nobody believed in us. Nobody even in our camp thought that we could qualify. And that year I ended up going to play in Montenegro. So I left the training center and was playing professionally in Montenegro, but keeping in close touch with the coach and with my teammates throughout the season. And then about a month before the Olympic trials, 2 key players on our team decided to quit. The captain at the time, a guy named Nathaniel Miller, and then a whole player by the name of Dan Stein. He was the second whole player who subbed me out. And, both of them, for their own personal reasons, just decided that they were going to step away. But, like, let's face it, part of it is that somewhere inside them, they clearly didn't really believe that we had a good chance of qualifying, right? And, and again, no criticism to them. I mean, they made the choices that they had to make in their life. But for us, for a program that had no depth to begin with, we just lost, a starter and the team captain and the backup whole player, right? And the replacements for those 2 players were Devin Diggle and Justin Boyd. 2 kids who had never played, and they were kids, right? I think Devin was 17 or 18, and Justin was a year younger. So, neither had ever played a senior national game. And here we are a month before the Olympic trials, and they're now in the roster for that team. So the guys actually came to Montenegro. We had a training camp there to start. Then we went to Hungary. We played a tournament a week before the qualifiers started. And in that tournament, Romania was there. And we knew because of the way the brackets at the qualification tournament were going to line up, that there was a good chance that was one of the teams we would have to beat to try to qualify. And they knew that too. And they wanted to send a message. And let me tell you, they sent a message. We played them in the last game in that tournament in Hungary, and we lost 16-5. So we lost by 11 goals to this Romanian team a week before we were going to the Olympic trials in their home court, where we would likely have to play them. And so needless to say that from a team morale point of view, like, confidence was not easily flowing. I think, when I look personally, I hope that my behaviors that week helped contributed to supporting some of the younger guys in the team. And certainly it was a focus of ours. And I talked with the coaches quite a bit, like, how do we make sure that mentally we go into this tournament feeling confident when all the evidence in front of us, federation that doesn't believe in us, guys who are jumping off the ship before the tournament, losing by 11 goals. And water polo, like, 11 goals is a big differential. How do we keep this young group focused and motivated and feeling confident? And whatever we did, it seemed to have worked, because when we got to the Olympic trials, we were rip roaring and ready to go. We played Italy, another top team and a favorite team early in the round robins. We tied them 3-3. You know, that for me was one of those memorable games because I got smashed in the face, got cut open, got pulled off to the side, got some stitches put in really, and then jumped right back in. You know, it was one of those sort of hockey game experiences where it's just like nothing's going to stop you from competing. And sure enough, the way the tournament broke out, we ended up playing Romania in the it was a quarterfinal game. And that quarterfinal would push you into the top four. And of course, the top four, there were 4 spots that were qualifying. So that game became the deciding game to whether or not we would qualify for the Olympics. And I mean, let me walk you through that game because it was unbelievable. So we're playing in Romania, a town called Verdea. It was a metal domed pool. So inside, like the noise was deafening because of the bouncing off the metal walls. And the way they had set up, because they only had that pool only had, you know, the one pool. So the warm-up pool was sort of down this hallway attached to another building that I think was a school or something. And both teams had to go in there together and warm up, kind of each team on half the pool. So we go, you know, our coaches had us really well prepared, had a great game plan in place, and we were a very disciplined team. I mean, we were a very young team, but, you know, unbelievable credit to those young guys because they bought into the discipline and that sort of professionalism to how we prepared for each game. So we show up and we're going through our warm-up routine, and you kind of notice that the Romanians weren't there yet. And they started moseying in, you know, probably a good 20, 30 minutes after the warm-up had started. And you could just tell by their body language, they were oozing arrogance, no positiveness there. They were just so confident. They were looking at us the way a lion might look at an injured gazelle. Like we were easy pickings. It was going to be nothing, right? They're laughing, they're joking. And so you're seeing that and you're kind of like, all right. And for me and some of the other guys, you talk to them in the warm, like you see that, that's our advantage. They're underestimating us. They're not going to know what hit them. We're going to come after them. Just be ready. You focus on your warm up. And so we go through the warm up. We get called over to the main pool. As you know, like, and for the audience, you know, before a water polo game, they have both teams line up on the side of the pool, and they introduce each player, and then the teams go through a handshake before the game starts, because after the game, you know, emotions can run pretty high. And so I'll never forget. I mean, I was number 12, so I was near the back of the row as we're doing the handshakes, and as we're walking the 2 lines, right, I could just see like the Romanian heads were here and the Canadian heads were here. Like they were just so much bigger than us. Every one of them, grizzled guys, you know, veterans, professional water polo men, fully grown men. And here we have this team of, like, you know, I mentioned Justin and Devin, but, you know, Kevin Graham, who was a key player on the team, young guy, baby face, no body hair whatsoever. Like we had so many guys on our team that were young. I was one of the oldest players. I think I was the oldest player, and I was 29 years old, right? The average age of the Romanian team was at least 28, 29 years old. So every reason not to believe we had a chance. And so we get in the pool, we do our little cheer. I remember looking at Kevin Graham, we looked at him and he just had this smile on his face. And it wasn't, again, a cocky smile, an arrogant smile. It was just this sort of assuredness that, like, we're ready to go. Let's see what we can do. And so, you know, and that's a moment that he and I shared. And to this day, we sometimes touch base and kind of reminisce on that, because it was such a beautiful, powerful moment of sort of confidence, but the right kind of confidence, that we knew the work we had put in. We knew we were ready to seize the moment. And our coaches in the preparation had been really clear. And this had been a tough thing for me, because the coach had come to me and asked me, because I typically would do some of the pre-game sort of motivating speeches for the guys kind of thing. And he asked me before this game not to. He asked me to tone it down, and his reason why, and he gave me a good why, because you got to imagine, I've been preparing this speech for like probably for the whole Olympic cycle. Like I was really ready to try to get the guys motivated. I had practiced and rehearsed this speech a gazillion times, but he came to me and he told me, you know what? The other team's going to come in arrogant, and he knew they were going to come in that way. The crowd was going to be behind them. The energy in that pool was going to be off the charts. Our opportunity was in being cold, cool, and methodical, on not getting caught up in the excitement of the moment, but instead to stay really, really methodical, really, really composed, not let our emotions spill over, and stay in the game early on. And as they started to get frustrated because we were keeping it close, that then that emotional sort of surge would be the way for us to take advantage of them. And sure enough, I mean, that's exactly the way the game played out. The first quarter, I think they went up by 3 goals. But we were there neck and neck. As I mentioned earlier, the referees were screwing us the whole game. Like, we would barely touch them, we would get kicked out. They could bite you quite literally and not deal with it. But we stayed composed. We had a great player down. Our goalie played great. And by the end of the second quarter, we had started to chip away, and we brought it to within one. And there was a moment right at the end of the second quarter. It's one of those, again, great kind of moments in your career where shot clock's winding down, game clock's winding down. There's a 7-meter foul rule, right? So at the time it was 7 meters, not 5 meters. So if you take a foul outside 7, you take a free throw. And I saw a great amount of space, and I went to get the ball. I took the foul, and then as I reached to grab the ball and I was ready to launch a rocket, my teammate and very, very good friend, dear friend Jean Sayet, was right next to me in the play, and he basically stole the ball from me. I mean, he didn't mean to steal it, but he also was trying to get a shot off, and he grabbed the ball away from me, and he went to shoot it. And I remember looking at him going, no, because I was so ready and I was feeling that shot. And then he fires the ball and he flubs it. Like, it just slips off his fingers. And so I had the time, as the ball is floating towards the net, to be like, Joe, what are you doing? Like, and then sure enough, what happens? The ball's going, the goalie jumps up. The goalie was their team captain, tries to squeeze it, ball slips through his hands, goal. And that tied the game. Or maybe put us up by one, I don't remember. But it was just like, it was unbelievable moment. And more importantly for them, that was the tipping point for them emotionally, because you could just see, I think we went up by one at that point. Their coaches were furious. The players started yelling at each other. They actually pulled their goalie after that, and he was one of the top goalies in the world at the time, but he had been the last guy to get in the warm-up, completely dismissive of us, and sure enough had screwed up in the first half, so they pulled him. Second quarter or second half, we ended up pushing the lead to a 3-goal lead. Like I mentioned, Justin scored the 9th goal, I think, in the game to put us up by there. And then what happened? Well, we had so many kickouts that by this point, we had, I think, 4 of the 6 starters were out of the game by the start of the fourth quarter. So all our veteran players, and now we were relying on these kids, Justin, Devin, Khan, Kudaba, like these young kids had to play meaningful minutes. Brandon Young had to play meaningful minutes in a Olympic qualifying game with a hostile crowd. And of course, they started to push back in the fourth quarter. They brought it to within 1. And then on the last offensive possession of the game, I'm checking the hole. I somehow managed to only have 2 kickouts through there. At this point, we've got 20 kickouts. We've got 5 or 6 guys that are out of the game, because 3 kickouts and you're out of the game. And sure enough, on a bit of a bad call, I get a kick out with, I think there was like 11 seconds left. And for me, it was my 3rd kick out. So now I'm swimming the bench, knowing that if they tie the game, we're going to go into overtime. And now I'm out, and now none of our starters are left. It would have been just the kids to try to play in overtime. And, and no comment on them. But just at that point, going to the bench, I was feeling like, shit, if they tie it, we're done. And just as fate would have it, they're moving the ball around. It goes to the 4 spot, so kind of a key shooting spot. And they're one of their best players, a sharpshooter who played on all top teams in the world. This guy named Florin Bonka. He's moving in, faking it. Oh, ball slips out of his hand. Drops into Kevin Mitchell's hands. He grabs it. Shot clock, or the clock runs out. Game is over. We've qualified. The stadium, which had been like so loud, goes completely silent. And when you watch the video, it's hilarious, because John Roos, a friend of ours that you know as well, right? He was there as a 14th player, so he was doing video for that game. And you just see like the crowd is going crazy. All of a sudden, game ends, it goes silent, except for these Canadian madmen who are yelling and screaming. You hear him running as he chases down the hallway and jumps in the pool. And we have this moment of pandemonium, and we've done it. We've done the impossible. We've beaten a team we had no business beating in their home pool. We beat the refs, who screwed us over as much as they possibly humanly could. And we defied all of those odds to book our ticket to Beijing. And, the last thing I'll say about that experience, so that was the sports story, which if we were hockey instead of water polo, that would be made into a movie, because it was unbelievable. But afterwards, right, so we're celebrating, we're going crazy, we can't believe it, we've qualified, and I find my way back into the hallway of the sort of warm-up pool to grab my stuff, and I go find a phone, and I call my mom, right, and just because I tried to call at the time my now ex-wife, but my partner at the time, didn't get through to her. Call my mom. Didn't get through to her, but left her a machine on her answering machine, which she still has, because it was back in the day when it was tapes on the answering machine. But I call her, and I couldn't contain it. I just started crying, thanking her because, we had a tough journey through my childhood, and she just had stayed sort of in my corner the whole time. And, so I leave that sort of message with her, and then I hang up the phone and I sort of slink down into a puddle on the ground. And, Ben, the fascinating thing is in that moment, what became crystal clear in my mind, because it went from like, we did it, Mom, like I'm going to the Olympics, like I'm going to be an Olympian. And I hang up the phone and I'm sitting there, and it just like, I had this crystal clear thought in my mind. And it was, I've been an Olympian the whole time. And when I say that, what I mean, like, this funny thing with the Olympic rings and all that, right? Like the Olympic rings, you only are an Olympian if you go to the Olympic Games and you compete there. And that's a fascinating thing when you look at some sports where they bring alternates, or like bobsleigh, where they might not decide on who's racing until the day of. And so you have all these people who actually go all the way to the Olympic Games, but they don't get that sort of title of Olympian. And then you think about all the different sports. I mean, now surfing's in there, and BMX biking, and then soccer or baseball's been in it and then not in it. And, all these incredible athletes who, because of no fault of their own, don't get to go compete in the Olympic Games, or someone who's at the top of their sport but gets injured before the Olympic Games, it doesn't compete, and they are not an Olympian. And I think for me, what I meant by that, or what was clear in my mind, was that whatever it means to be an Olympian, that idea of pursuing your personal best and pursuing excellence as a way of life, you live that whether or not you compete at the Olympic Games. And if you go on to that journey and you make that kind of commitment on that journey, whether or not you actually compete at the games, whether you step on a podium or not, that is actually kind of irrelevant. It's really that journey and that commitment to excellence. And I had been living that since I was 17, and I moved out to Calgary all by myself and slept on a floor for 6 months because I couldn't afford a bed, and all the 6-hour-a-day trainings and all the injuries and the rehab and the recovery, and like all of that process, that is what being an Olympian is about. Going to the games and performing at the big show is great, and it's great and all that, but it's really about the journey and the process. And I realized in that moment that, like I said, I had been an Olympian all along. And that rings really true to me even more so today, because you asked about, the last part of your question was about the Olympic Games themselves. Frankly, the Olympic Games sucked. Like after we qualified for that after that qualification win, we did not win another game for the rest of the season or that summer until the last game at the Olympics. Like we had, for a whole bunch of reasons, there were some injuries, our coaches got a little bit, they cracked under the pressure, to be frank, to a degree, and started to be very, very controlling with the team. That created a lot of friction through the summer. And just, we did not have a great performance summer. There were some decisions that did not support our performance. That as a coach I learned from, of sort of like what you shouldn't do if you're trying to help a team deal with all these things. But inevitably we went to the Olympic Games and we didn't perform well. And when I came home from the Olympic Games, I hated the experience. I did not want to talk to everybody. Oh, the Olympics, you went to the Olympics, Nat, tell me all about it. And for me, I went on the world stage. We performed poorly. I personally didn't perform to the standards that I wanted to perform at. The whole experience of those 2 weeks was kind of a downer. And, and I wasn't there. Yeah, we were in the village, and yeah, we saw the NBA guys and the tennis players and this and that, and the opening ceremonies. And yeah, there were all these crazy things. But in the moment, for me, after the Olympic Games, it was a disappointment. I mean, competitive, like I was there to compete, and the whole world and all my friends and family and all these people got to watch us finish 11th. Right. And yeah, we weren't favored. I mean, 11th is actually probably where we were ranked going into it. But we believed we could get into the top 8. And frankly, I believe that had I performed better, I could have helped the team, achieve a better result. And that's where I stayed in for a good year and a half, 2 years afterwards. And it took some time before I finally started to separate from that and then start to experience or appreciate the whole experience and the journey for myself. My mom, who got to come watch the Olympic Games, my partner and her family, and like, over time, I started to, and now I feel very fondly about the Olympic experience. But in the moment right after, because of the competitive nature, it didn't land so well.
Absolutely. Nathaniel, I want to first thank you for just describing that whole story. Like I felt a lot of your passion, and you're definitely a good storyteller. I'm sure a lot of people that listened, whether they know water polo or not, or whether they were there with you, like some of the names that you mentioned, right? Justin Boyd and Devin Diggle and John Roos, and the list could go on. A story is very powerful, and all the emotions that went into that game, and all the things that led up to that, right? All the mental fitness tool sets, in terms of your whole team and going into the right way and taking it. I don't want to use the word serious, but being super prepared, I guess. Right. And something that I just want to go from there is, there's a very good writer named James Clear, and I admire him a lot. He actually wrote the book Atomic Habits. I think I've mentioned his name maybe at least 5 or 6 times in different episodes on this podcast. And he always talks about like the journey, the process, becoming what you want to become, right? And having those core values and those desires and creating that mindset that you are an athlete or you are an Olympian, kind of like what you had used, and with that journey of consistent habits, you'll get there. In fact, each day you're going to make small improvements and just get better and better and better and better. And the question is not if you are an Olympian, the question is always when, right? And that's kind of what happened in your case. You and your team were actually at that level, probably even earlier. But in this game, as in everything else in life, it's moment to moment in terms of achieving greatness or accomplishing a big result. And so all those habits over time paid off. And that's what got you guys there. And something that I want to lead to from here, as you know, the purpose of this podcast is to inspire millions of people about achieving greatness and enhancing their overall personal well-being. So what is your definition of greatness?
My definition of greatness. I think you kind of touched on it there, but I think in some ways, and it gets a bit semantic, but I don't know that you ever achieve greatness, right? I mean, greatness is a process. It is a day-to-day, a moment-to-moment. And in fact, anyone who claims that they are always great or they've achieved greatness, I would say is a bit of a liar, because we're human beings and we're fallible and we make mistakes and we have setbacks and we learn things and we have great habits, and then we have things that get in the way or moments that, we have a global pandemic that maybe throws us off of our routines or our things. And that's the journey that we're on. None of us are perfect. None of us are ever great. We have moments of greatness, and some of us are lucky enough that we've had mentors or guides or opportunities or the privilege to develop the kind of resilience that allows you to line up more and more positive habits or more habits that are aligned to your intentions. And so for me, when I look at other people, like people that inspire and that I try to emulate, it is people that have a great alignment between their intentions and their actions. And I think greatness is really when someone has the capacity and the discipline to consistently course correct to make sure that their actions are reflecting their true intentions. And when they're not, the humility and the self-awareness to acknowledge it and take steps to change it. So I think it's greatness isn't an end point. It is that sort of ongoing relationship with your own intentions and then your how that shows up in the world.
Awesome. Yeah, no. And it kind of reminds me of, I know Matthew McConaughey, I know he talks a lot about how he's never actually great. He's always looking to become better because it's an ongoing journey and there's moments to moments, kind of like what both of us have just talked about. And so, yeah, no, I really appreciate hearing that. And also just having humility, right? Being humble. Those are all ways that we could always keep striving to be our best, right? Not getting over full of ourselves, kind of like that story that you had mentioned against like the Romanians. And that's all obviously a key lesson there as well.
I had one other, I guess, there, and since you mentioned that process of always learning or that curiosity piece. I came across it. So in the work that I do now, I work at an emergency homeless shelter for children and families. And so, starting to learn the last 2 years has been a journey of learning about trauma. And trauma is a really interesting domain that we're still trying to understand better. And I was at a session about 2 weeks ago with a leading researcher in child trauma. His name is Dr. Bruce Perry. And, he talked about resilience in a way that completely changed how I understand resilience, and resilience is something that we think about as one of the habits, and grit, right? Angela Duckworth's great book on that. And this idea that there's a set of practices that we can develop the skill of resilience. And he offered a different way of looking at it and understanding that actually resilience itself is a reflection of incredible privilege. When and I'm a parent now, when you think about a child who grows up and gets the right kinds of supports and developmentally appropriate supports to be able to grow and develop, if you give a child certain exposures or certain environments early on, their capacity to develop resiliency is massive. If you rob a child of those things, if a child grows up and is constantly in trauma or crisis, they actually, no matter what they do later on in life, their capacity for resilience is going to be much narrower to develop that resilience. And so I think that's, I share that with your audience because, we like to think about resilience as an individual responsibility to grow and develop and model certain behaviors and habits to reinforce that. And absolutely, resilience is something that you can expand it. But I think it's important for all of us to understand that if we're in a position to be quite resilient, it's likely because early in our childhood development, we had nurturing, we had care, we had support, we had these privileges that we take for granted because they're just how I was raised by my parents, or the schools I went to, or my teachers, and all these things. And I work in a world right now, and it's been stark to me over the last 2 years of understanding how many people in our communities, even here in Canada, incredibly wealthy country, even in Canada, how many children grow up without those opportunities. And later on in life, when we try to hold them accountable to developing or showing more resilience, we're kind of missing the boat in understanding that if we don't support people early on, if we haven't had that privilege to be resilient, then we're operating from a very different set of opportunities.
I'm glad that you added those points because I had a previous guest on my show. Her name is Kim Barthel. And she was actually the world-class occupational therapist that actually worked with Theo Fleury and helped him heal his traumas and develop mental tools to overcome those challenges that he had and actually live a great life. So you actually talked on similar things that she said about nurture and finding different ways to do that for people, right? It could just simply be from just being there, being present beside them. It could be listening. It could be interacting with them, engaging, and there's so many ways. And so that's actually a good episode for either yourself or any of my listeners to also check out to go deeper in that kind of domain of kind of trauma and resilience and how to overcome it and kind of live a great life. So Nathaniel, who is a future guest that you would like to see on this show?
Who is a future guest I'd like to see on the show? Well, I'm gonna steal a bit of bias here from the water polo community. I mean, this incredible woman that I had the opportunity to learn from and compete around and with early in my career, Nathaniel Miller. She's the local from the Montreal region. An Indigenous woman who was an incredible competitor. Had some very difficult situations early in her life, and just an incredible person first and foremost. But since her retirement, has gone on to do some really great things in the community and continue to be a phenomenal leader. And I think she's someone who your audience would benefit to hear from and learn from.
I thank you for that name. And I take you up on that challenge there to bring her on like the show and showcase her kind of greatness in terms of all the stuff that she's doing now. And then last thing, Nathaniel, where could my listeners go to connect with you online?
Well, frankly, I don't post too much on social media. I mean, I am on Twitter a little bit there, but LinkedIn, I think that's where we connected. LinkedIn is probably, where I'm most easily reachable. And that's probably the best way if someone wants to get a hold of me.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks. Nat, I want to take the last moment here to really thank you for your time. Like it was a true pleasure to reconnect with you, because even though I was a lot younger than you, when we first connected, even though I had watched you play it as a younger Dollard player, connecting with you via email when I was seeking some mentorship from you, to get some advice as a young player and looking up to, Team Canada's greatest player at the time. And it meant a lot to me. It had a big impact around that time. I think I was training on like the Quebec team. So it had a big impact on my water polo career. And I'm sure a lot of the stories that were kind of spoken about today or even discussions probably had a lot of impact as well now on kind of others. So I want to thank you again for being here today.
Yeah, well, Ben, I mean, thank you. And I got to say, like for me, it's kind of the inverse. Like my heart is so full of gratitude when I have the opportunity to support someone. And and like when you reached out, I mean, I try to make myself available when I was playing, and I try to as well now, to whenever I can, if someone wants some help or thinks that I might have something to offer. And just when you hear that like you just shared there, like when you hear that some words you shared or some time you took to support someone, it meant something to them. I mean, that's like what a gift. And so thank you for that. And yeah, thrilled to come on your show, and we'll definitely share the episode and share other episodes, and check out some of the other ones in the archives, and wish you all the best as you continue to bring these important messages to people.
Thank you for listening to the Living Your Greatness podcast. If this show has added value, please subscribe, leave a rating, and make a review.